Entertainment is everywhere. Instant, personalized, almost infinite. With just a swipe or a click, we have access to more stories, more music, more content than ever before. So, are we really in a golden age of creation and consumption? Or was life richer before it was taken over by screens? In other words, is entertainment today making us better or worse? In this episode of Doha Debates, we're joined by experts, global thinkers, each with their own take on this issue.
What a big topic this is. I think we've assumed that having more choices in entertainment and in information is always a good thing, and I think going forward we really need to pay as much attention to the drawbacks.
So modern entertainment is not better for us, as far as I can tell, because it's hijacking our brain's reward pathway. Now we need more and more pleasure in order to feel any kind of pleasure at all.
I think entertainment today is pervasive. It's something that shapes each person and society. The question is, how are we going to make sure that we're shaping it back?
Their perspectives will be explored and questioned in a Majlis-style debate, grounded in understanding and a search for truth. Watching over all of this will be a group of university students and recent graduates. They come from different universities in Qatar Foundation's Education City and beyond, and have been preparing for this debate.
We are now in an age where we're consuming far more digital entertainment than we are seeking entertainment outside.
All these between 16 to 25, 28, we're all trying to escape reality because of the things that are happening in the world, and it really affects how we live our lives. Why can't we live a second without Instagram?
The important thing here with entertainment, the responsibility is not necessarily to make you a better person, but to genuinely try to, express some form of the human experience through what you're doing.
After our guests finish their debate, the students will reflect and deliberate before returning with their own insights, ready to challenge, agree, or offer entirely new perspectives. I'm Darine Abogaida, and this is Doha Debates. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for your time and for joining us. Anna, if historians were to, if future historians judge us by our entertainment, what would they say?
I think they would be really struck by the ways in which we consume entertainment in isolation. Families are not engaging together in the pleasures of entertainment, but rather each individual family member alone in a separate room with their separate screens, consuming entertainment separately. I think that would be striking.
Nicholas?
I think they'd certainly be struck by the huge number of choices we have at every moment. But they'd also see that we're not very good at regulating those choices. So if you give us an infinite number of choices, we seem to make an infinite number of choices. And that means we're constantly shifting our attention. Our screens have very many different things going on at once. And so we're being entertained by and being stimulated by many, many more things, but our relationship to those things is more shallow because we're shifting our focus constantly.
Marya, what would future historians say about us?
When we think about modern entertainment, one of the things that feels really striking is just the level of noise. And how is it that we can actually have discernment when thinking about what is truly entertaining versus what is actually leading to a level of distraction and fragmentation, both on an individual level, even in terms of your own identity and ability to make decisions, but also societally and in families.
I love the use of the word noise because I think it really captures the overall overstimulation that we have, which gets to Nick's point about too many choices. It's the stress of abundance, right? Which is really a tipping point in our culture when you think about how humans have lived for most of our time on this planet. We've had to strive in a world of scarcity, and now we have this world of overwhelming overabundance. Abundance itself can be a stressor and really is an unprecedented stressor in the modern world. Even things that nominally are supposed to make us feel good, too much of these feel-good things make us feel bad.
Human beings are seekers. If we know that there's something new and novel around us in the environment, then that's what grabs our attention. So when you give us an abundance of new stimuli coming at us all the time, that very deep instinct takes over and we can't stay focused on one thing. We've created this environment for ourselves, media environment, that we thought would be very rich. What was technologically fragmented before, back in the analog age, where you had a newspaper here and a magazine there and a television there and a radio there and some mail, a letter from someone you knew here, and we've crushed all those things together into a digital stream that comes through one device. That kind of compression of everything ends up fragmenting our consciousness in a way that's almost the opposite of what we used to have, where you had to make disciplined choices among different types of media and types of entertainment. So the fragmentation of the technology actually led toward a more unified consciousness in a series of choices where you were in charge of what you looked at.
So look, speaking of the different types of mediums, then how would you classify entertainment?
Well, back in 1985, the sociologist Neil Postman wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death about television and said media turns everything into entertainment. Had a very good point, and it's even become more so now, that it's very, very hard to distinguish between what comes through media as entertainment and everything else. So for instance, news is presented to us as entertainment. Pretty much everything has some quality of entertainment to it, because the media companies know that entertaining someone means grabbing their attention. So whatever else they may be doing, they're looking to entertain us.
I definitely feel like there is this pressure on news to capture the attention of people so that they can get ad revenue. And even when I was working for video production of newspaper back in my country, I was in charge of making reels. One of the tactics that I used was I wanted to have the most amusing and most eye-catching information in front so that I could capture people's attention. News has become entertainment. If it's not eye-catching, then the existence of the news media is precarious, in my opinion.
When we have now put this cognitive load that I think is untenable on people, there's also an instinct that we're starting to see play out of people wanting to harken back to simpler times, right? And so, and also because of the way that social media specifically is set up, there is this kind of the echo chambers that start to happen, right? And so you're also seeing kind of polarization in societies and this devaluing of objective truth because of, frankly, entertainment and the way that we receive information. This is a mixed bag, right? There's positives and negatives. And so one of the kind of positives that I have seen come out of this is that there's much more of a democratization to access, right, to information and to actually being able to share your story, right? Historically, in a lot of kind of traditional media entertainment, there was a very particular perspective or story on many different issues. And so now you start to see people being able to represent themselves, their cultures, their viewpoints in a much more accurate and nuanced way, which I think is valuable. And it has kind of fostered more robust conversation. But I think that the way that advancement in technology is happening so quickly, there's such a lack of regulation. And so what ends up happening is there's incredible conversation or creativity happening, but there's no way for people to find a sense of consensus or unity. And we end up being in these kind of isolated communities that have very specific viewpoints.
So for you, what do you classify as entertainment? And do you think, Nicholas seemed to say, correct me if I'm wrong, that everything is entertainment. Do you agree with that viewpoint?
Yeah, entertainment has now seeped into every aspect because we are in an attention economy. And so in order to get somebody's attention, that has to be something attractive. And so we've kind of made it a norm for things to be entertaining in order for us to actually give them attention. And so really it's kind of pervasive. And that's why I think it's so important that we don't disengage, because we need to be able to shape it.
How do you classify entertainment?
I think when I think about entertainment, I really look at it from a neuroscience perspective, that entertainment is anything that causes instant stimulation of our brain's reward pathway, releases a lot of dopamine all at once, puts us in a kind of a trance-like state, which is both a form of avoidant coping, that is a way to deal with negative emotions or things that make us uncomfortable in our lives. And also, at the end of the day, essentially causes us to disengage from other people in the world around us. It's a kind of like an auto stimulation, or dare I use the word, a kind of mental masturbation.
What types of entertainment does that to you? Or does it do to a person, not to you specifically?
Yeah. Well,
is it everything?
No, it's not everything. It's not everything. But it's very clear that digital media in particular is inherently rewarding for the human brain. It's not really all that surprising when you think that we invented it. The cognitive adherence of the medium is super powerful. And as someone who studies addiction, that's interesting to me, because when you look at addictive substances, any substance that we ingest, whether it's nicotine or opioids or alcohol, those substances are rewarding because they mimic a chemical in our brain that we already make in very small amounts, and that we only get access to in times of intense need or after a lot of work to get our brains to release those feel-good neurotransmitters.
But that's not always the case, though, right?
No. Like sometimes it's just coping.
No, but it's not always you're trying to escape something. Sometimes you actively want to seek out.
Okay, that's true.
When she brought up the topic of addiction, I thought there is intentionality to the way we are consuming it, in that people choose to be addicted to it. People choose to use it as a resource, whether to escape or whether to feel certain kind of emotions, good, bad, evil, whatever. Just to say that it's mindless, I think that is something that I did not agree with. Typically, it's done with some level of intentionality, if not all.
Technology is so interesting because it's a drug that we entirely created from whole cloth to mirror the way that our brains essentially work and our neuronal circuits work. So there's no way that it couldn't be addictive because we built it to be that way.
I mean, the only problem I have with calling it addiction in the same way, drugs or alcohol or something are addictive, is that it offloads our responsibilities and our choices onto the substance, which in this case is media, digital media in particular. And I think what we have to realize is that the algorithms that now determine what we're fed, what we look at, are reading our desires, and they're feeding us what we want. So where we need to begin is questioning our desires. Why do we like so much what we're being fed? Because we are complicit in this problem of overstimulation, overabundance, constant distraction.
Nicholas, I think semantics aside, whether we call it addiction or compulsive overconsumption or problematic use, it doesn't really matter to me. What matters is the medium itself is inherently reinforcing for the human brain. It was engineered to be that way. The culpability in this process of our brains being hijacked by digital media is in part in the hands of individual consumers, but also in the hands of the corporations that make and profit from the digital medium itself. It's not one or the other. It's, addiction is always going to be a biopsychosocial disease. I don't think it's wrong to say that digital media is addictive and that digital media is a drug that was designed to be addictive. We can get addicted if we are exposed to addictive drugs. We don't need any other reason. And certainly there are other reasons.
I was going to ask you why we have these desires, but you've answered my question pretty well. But Nicholas, go ahead and respond. And then Marya, I want to hear from you.
I agree that the whole system is designed to encourage compulsive consumption. My only problem with drug metaphor is that it's not a chemical substance we're ingesting or consuming.
But it works the same way.
It's information, it's communication, it's messages from other people often. And this requires us to think of our own responsibility. Why is communication, which is so important to human life and particularly social life, why is it so distorted when it comes through media so that it no longer is a force often that joins us together, but is a force that fragments us or even isolates us? By saying, well, it's a kind of drug, we miss the fact that it's information and communication and messages which are which are what society is all about.
Yeah, so I'm just going to jump in there because I do disagree with you on that point. We know that people can get addicted to behaviors just as they can get addicted to drugs and alcohol. When you look at the phenomenology of people getting addicted to behaviors, it looks exactly like people getting addicted to drugs and alcohol, right? People start out for typically one of two reasons: to have fun or to solve a problem. If it works for them, they return to using that substance or that behavior. Over time, it changes their brains. Now they need more of the substance in more potent forms to get the same effect. And pretty soon, they're marshaling all of their resources, time, energy, creativity, and money to getting the drug, hiding drug use, recovering from using the drug, and doing it again. And of course, this is extreme when we think about digital media as a drug. But I can tell you that in clinical care, we see these cases. It's a minority of users. Most people will be able to self-correct, but we see extreme cases where people are so addicted to various forms of digital media that they are morbidly depressed, suicidal in some cases, unable to function. And they look just like patients who are addicted to drugs and alcohol.
Marya, where do you land on this?
I find this conversation fascinating, and it's a conversation about theory. When I think in a real practical sense, this is here to stay. So how do we engage, right? What do we do now that we know that this is here? The first is media literacy. How do we teach people how to actually be more discerning and disciplined around this? How do we regulate, for example, when young people get access? And then the other piece of it is to what Nicholas was talking about in terms of information, is how do we have a sense of agency around what does that information actually look like, but what is good information and what is bad information? And is there ways for us to arbitrate, how do we limit harmful disinformation, for example?
I'm just curious, though, whether you see this as a drug or not, that categorization of a drug.
I don't. I do think that there's probably a portion of users that do fall into that category. I think that's true. And if I'm being very self-aware, I totally get a dopamine hit when I'm engaging in digital media. But I also think that there's lots of experiences that I have where I have a positive response or a negative response. For me, it's not necessarily a drug. It's more a lived reality that we have to navigate.
The thing that resonated with me the most was Dr. Anna's comparison between drugs and social media.
Social media acts as a kind of drug because, it's the same idea, right? You look and you kind of get a hit.
Although she was coming from a very scientific standpoint, which is the brain chemicals and how people react, I still see that logic.
I looked at myself and I was like, what do I do when I'm bored or when I'm waiting for something? I'm going to take out my phone. And then I was like, what does someone do when they have a cigarette? They just take it out, or whoever's taking drugs. So I was like, actually, this behavior is pretty similar. In a way, that's how hooked and attached we've now become to our devices, and it's very dangerous.
When I'm done recording all this, and I go to the room to get my phone, I can almost physically feel the hit I get from using my phone after hours of not touching it.
Nicholas, are people, do you think, looking for a sense of meaning when they revert to entertainment in all its forms?
Sometimes. I think people are always looking for meaning in general. So we're always trying to figure out how we fit into the world, how we fit into society, how we fit into nature, and that's a meaning-seeking procedure. But I don't think being entertained is always about seeking meaning. Sometimes it's the pure enjoyment of being stimulated. Some entertainment is naturally kind of superficial, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to, watch a comedy on TV and expect to get great meaning. It's okay just to laugh, and that's fine. But I do think that the kind of the media environment we've created for ourselves in many ways is impeding us from seeking some greater meaning.
So what are we losing here?
I think we're losing on a very basic level an ability to engage with deeper forms of entertainment itself, ones that do require a lot of thought and a lot of concentration. Now, in the entertainment business, there's a lot of discussion of first screen and second screen. First screen being your phone, and the second screen being, the movie you're watching or the TV show you're watching or whatever else you're doing. And so built into that view is this fragmentation of consciousness. And it means that the second screen, a movie or a TV series or whatever, kind of can't be too complicated and can't be too deep and can't make too big of a demands on the viewer, because you have to leave room for the viewer to, keep up with texting and stuff.
People can binge watch like a dumb sitcom, but then if you want them to sit down for like a good 2-hour film, they get distracted immediately.
Exactly. At the level of entertainment itself, we're kind of creating this system that amuses us and maybe addicts us and keeps us stimulated, but is in some ways blocking us from kind of the deeper enjoyments of not just entertainment, but art.
Maybe we can make a distinction between entertainment and art. That's a big discussion, and even how we define art could take up many hours. But maybe, a simplified take on that is that art forces us to engage with the world in a different way, pushes our thinking past the boundaries. It's not merely about distracting and self-soothing, which is, what entertainment does, I think. I also recognize that digital media in particular is not just a potent drug, but also a powerful tool that's fully integrated into modern life, and we're not going to unintegrate it. I wish that I felt more optimistic about our ability to moderate our use, which you were getting at earlier, Marya, which is we have to be more disciplined, discerning consumers. Unfortunately, if you look at all the sorts of interventions like take a break or watch time, they don't work. I think, it means we have to continue to explore how to be in a healthier relationship.
But do you think that entertainment impedes us from higher meaning?
I think that too much entertainment not only impedes us from higher meaning, but actually contributes to our suffering. And again, I base this in large part on what we know about the neuroscience and the pursuit of hedonic reward. The two-screen thing is a great example of that. Now we require not just to watch Netflix, but to watch Netflix and scroll on our phones at the same time.
Marya, what about you? What do you think? Are we looking for higher meaning in entertainment?
Entertainment, and especially if we're talking about film and television, tend to be about storytelling. Now, reality television is really different, but if you're talking about scripted kind of content, a lot of that is meaning making. It is actually about finding meaning. Storytelling is how human beings have always made meaning in the world, right? Since the beginning of time. It's actually the way that we understand the world around us. It's the way that we used to document history, right? Our oral traditions and these kinds of things.
For us humans, it's easier for us to find meaning through storytelling. I really resonated with that because as a Muslim, we see that the Quran is the words of God, right? And so the way God conveys so many different ideas and so many different things that we should implement or learn from is through storytelling. It should mean something. It means that we react to it on a much deeper level than we would like to believe.
I actually think a lot of filmmakers would say that cinema, film, television is art, right? It's a transformative, it's a transportive way for people to move beyond their boundaries. And so the problem here is just scale and volume. We have so much noise that it makes it much more difficult to have an appropriate relationship at this point.
Nicholas?
I'd like to go back to something that Anna started with, which is the isolating quality of entertainment today. If you think of, in the broad history of humanity, entertainment was mainly communal. You go out and do things, you sit around a fire and tell stories or whatever. And then with the spread of literacy and the spread of printing, you had books arrive and people began to read books, which is a very private way of entertaining yourself. But there was still a balance between private entertainment and communal, where you'd go out, you'd see a show, you'd get together with friends. And then I think over the last 100 years or so, we've seen an ever-increasing emphasis on solitary entertainment. We had the introduction of radio and TV, which brought entertainment into the home. And then we have the introduction of the computer screen and all forms of media and entertainment turning into digital streams through computer screens and then through our phones.
I grew up in two places. I grew up in the city, but during vacation, I had to go back to my village, right? In my village, there was only the radio. So there was no forms of entertainment. There was not even a TV. So when the TV first came to my village, every kid in the village used to flock to this one relative's house who had the this home TV. And that house was very special to me, I think. But now everybody has TV. And I felt like the former was better than the latter, because the things that like when I look at the phones, like when I look at what they're seeing, when I look at what my aunt is seeing, like I feel like it's so unproductive. It's like all gossipy, celebrity gossips.
You think the phone now is the main medium of entertainment. It's this little rectangle that we hold in our own hand and stare at. There's this incredible paradox or irony that we've created this mechanism that is in some ways a social mechanism. People are socializing on one hand more than ever before through their phones, and yet they feel more lonely than ever before. So I think we've lost something as we've shifted ever further away from entertainment as this communal way of coming together toward it being more isolating, more lonely, even though we're using our phones to communicate with other people.
I really agree with that. The ways in which this phone-based medium, which is 24/7 and mobile, allows people to enter into this immersive trance-like state really at whim, anytime, anywhere. When we are using this device, which is nominally intended to connect us to other people, but which really ultimately just is sort of our way to decathect from other people because we can use it to get all of our needs met, right? Our intellectual needs, our emotional needs. Then we no longer need to rely on other people. And of course, so much of human connection is about interdependent neediness. If we didn't need each other, we wouldn't go through the enormous difficulty, work, and complexity of maintaining human relationships, because human beings are a lot of work, right? I mean, it takes communication, effort, time, and now we have a medium where we can just swipe right or swipe left and move on to the next person. And not only is it leading to this epidemic of loneliness, but it's actually contributing to the epidemic of literal aloneness. There are more people who live alone today than at any point in human history, and it's no longer, a dystopian, distant future that we would live in isolated little rat-like cells all by ourselves and communicate with other people only through, the digital devices. I don't know, that just doesn't seem like the right direction to me.
The fact that in your pocket, you have a device that you can use to escape from the world. Like, the way we're losing touch of reality, it's crazy. And I actually fear what the future will look like if we continue this particular trajectory.
Does this mean, according to what you're saying, that entertainment is sort of disintegrating the family structure, essentially?
I mean, I think we're seeing that. I mean, if you look at the very first signal for the dark side of digital media, it's parents. It's parents raising children in the world today who can see for themselves that this child is disengaged from family life, auto-stimulating through the medium, then stops and is antisocial, dysregulated, irritable. There are a lot of studies showing that excessive use of the medium causes depression, anxiety, self-harm, attention deficit. I mean, we have data showing that, but really, you don't need to look but beyond parents who are trying to raise kids in this digitally wired world.
Students would come into class like half asleep, and when I asked them why, they'd go like, oh, we're on TikTok until like 3 a.m. Mind you, they wake up for school at like 5 a.m. So they've only had like 2 hours of sleep. In terms of the effects that has in the classroom, I think something I keep on bringing up and I've brought up today time and time again is, again, their inability to engage with a complex idea. It's also taken a toll on their critical thinking skills, on their analytical skills, and their retention skills just generally. Their minds are elsewhere, their attention is like insanely fragmented. Don't give your child a phone until they're 16. Let's start there. No, I'm kidding. On a less radical note, I think I'd want them to limit their children's screen time to ideally 20-30 minutes. What does a 13-year-old have to do on social media? Why do you have an Instagram account? To post what?
Marya, is it time, do you think, to rethink what we ask of our entertainment, pleasure, purpose, or something more enduring, perhaps?
Yeah, and I also want to respond to something. Sure. We're talking about this very much from like an individual perspective, like how an individual is going to engage. But I do think that cultures across the world are different. And I think that cultures that are more collectivist in nature inherently and have social network and fabric inherently are also more resilient to kind of the advent of new technology and entertainment.
She said that collectivist societies have more resilience
to this kind of change.
I don't agree. Because we all gather now at family houses and go on our phones.
I mean,
Nothing
look at us.
changed.
We're a bunch of brown people and we're all addicted, so.
Yeah.
There is a way in which a digital life can be inherently connecting, I think, as long as you actually have a robust social life as well. A lot of the data we're talking about is probably in more individualistic societies, where inherently the family structure has already been kind of deteriorating over the last few decades. And so has technology kind of exacerbated those problems? Probably, right? But I don't want to conflate them as saying this is what is causing this. I'm South Asian, and I think about Indian culture and how, you know, technology and entertainment has enabled for us to connect with our family all over the world and have much deeper relationships than the last generation did. And I want us to get to like really practically thinking about entertainment, because entertainment is here to stay, right? Like the world that we live in, like there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. The question that you're asking is really around like, number one, how do we engage? But number two, how do we actually see ourselves as being creators? Because inherently, entertainment these days, it's not a one-way relationship anymore. It is actually a two-way relationship between the creator and the audience, right? And in a lot of ways, the audience becomes the creators. If you look at fandoms as an example, fandoms are an incredible way that people are organizing themselves online and taking a piece of intellectual property or a story and creating a whole other world out of it. If this is the reality that we live in, how do we actually see ourselves as being part of entertainment and part of creating entertainment?
Nicholas.
There's a danger there. And I agree that, you know, one of the good things about digital media is it gives people who were shut off from self-expression, it gives them a way to express themselves. But there's a danger particularly in social media as an entertainment vehicle, but in other things too, where we've all become content creators. But what is the content we're creating? It's often ourself. We are displaying ourselves, we're sharing pictures, we're making comments, we're making posts. And what happens is our very self, we begin to see as a form of media content that we're broadcasting to an audience. And then we do market research. Oh, how many likes did I get? How many followers do I have?
Market research is crazy.
How do I get more views?
Like
How do
my
I get
photo,
more
guys.
likes?
I'm posting something.
And there's a danger there that the self becomes itself a form of media content that we're constantly tweaking in order to satisfy the audience.
We keep going back for more, and also this issue on the creators that you touched upon. What's this sort of psychology behind the creators?
There are two different psychologies, I think, that are at work and sometimes in conflict. One is the desire to express oneself. But the other is the desire to control people's reactions to you and to formulate yourself as content. So in many ways, these two desires, one very healthy, I want to be part of the conversation, I'm creative, I want to share, you know, my thoughts and my creativity with others, with this danger that you become this piece of content kind of geared to an audience that you're not part of as a society, but you're very much thinking of them as an audience. And I'm not sure how these two desires, one seems to me pretty good and the other seems to me pretty dangerous. I'm not sure how that plays out.
So one day I'm randomly scrolling, I see this girl and she's saying, ice cream so good, ice cream so good, gang gang, gang gang, and it has so many likes and it became such a huge hit.
Yum, ice cream so good, yum, ice cream so good, yum, ice cream so good.
With our current generation, yeah, we are in trouble. We are definitely in trouble. I don't know what it will take, I don't know what kind of awareness needs to be raised, but the current trajectory is pretty concerning, and this is just one of the scary things that people are liking, and it doesn't look too good.
I want to get back, though, to something that you were saying, Marya, about collectivist versus individualist societies, and I certainly appreciate that those differences are palpable in the world. I come from a very individualist culture, which is quickly accelerating toward what I call endemic narcissism, where, narcissism is no longer the purview of an isolated few, but we're all narcissistic now. And I would love to think that there are cultures that are more insulated from that, but I'm not sure it's true. And if you look at global patterns of consumption of entertainment or digital media, you're seeing the same things going on in collectivist cultures as you are in individualist cultures. Like, I would be so heartened to think that, collectivist cultures are not struggling with compulsive overconsumption of digital media and other forms of entertainment, but that is not what the data show, and it's certainly not what I'm seeing with my own eyes. I mean, I really think the smartphone has become the new cigarette, right? I mean, you can even walk around the beautiful city of Doha, and there's almost no one that hasn't, in interrupting themselves in whatever they're doing, pulled out the phone as a way to distract, self-soothe, entertain. It's a strange world.
Marya, I'm gonna give you the opportunity to respond, but Anna, you were talking about the narcissism earlier on. So is the narcissism being reflected in the content that's being created?
I think digital algorithmic entertainment drives us toward increasing isolation and self-preoccupation. And this is what, the natural end point of the compulsive overconsumption of a medium that forces us to constantly reflect on ourselves, our image in the world, get likes, get comments, get shares.
The amount of influence, how entertainment has a lot of influence on people, a good and bad influence.
And I agree with you. There's enormous democratization, enormous opportunities also for creativity. There's a lot of beautiful stuff that's available on the internet, and it really is art. But the data suggests that most of us are passive consumers of the medium. And that's concerning.
Marya, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I hear you on all the points that you've made. I mean, I'm thinking about a couple kind of pieces of information. The first is there's a policy think tank, Demos, out of Washington, D.C., that has shown that the vast majority of Americans know someone different from themselves through television or film. Right, and now with digital media, that's obviously also true. I've been looking at some of the digital media trends and information that's been coming out, and one of the things that we're starting to see audiences really asking for is like the natural conclusion of like short form content, which is TikTok. And what audiences are now asking for is longer form content, and that is a really different thing. And so I have a question around like, are human beings going to kind of regulate? Are we going to kind of swing back? Are we going to say, wait, like, look, like the moment that we're in, it's not really actually fulfilling me in the way that I'm looking for it to.
Nicholas, you're nodding along.
Well, I might be nodding, but I'm a little bit dubious of that. But if you ask people what they want, they'll say, oh, I want law, I want to be intellectually engaged or whatever. But if you look at how they behave, maybe not.
So that's not the reality, is what you're saying.
Probably not. And I think we're entering a new age where traditional content creators, whether it's individuals or film studios or whatever, are now going to be joined by machines. That AI now is capable of generating content. Might not be very good content, but a lot of what people consume is not very good content. So all of the creators, musicians, illustrators, artists, are now going to be in competition with AI for the attention, often very distracted attention of the consumer or the viewer or the listener.
I'm so glad he brought up AI because finally, it actually is like the antithesis of art.
I hope that it's true that people really want longer form, more complex narratives. And I have to say that longer form complex narratives we've seen in, TV series, they exist simultaneously with TikTok. And I think that will continue to be true. And I think that we're entering really a new age of entertainment. And again, I don't know how this is going to play out, but certainly even if the content that is created by AI is mediocre, it can still displace a lot of the work and the livelihoods of actual creative human beings.
I hear what you all are saying about the algorithms, but Anna, in our era, I mean, it's all about reality TV these days, right? Has entertainment become driven, do you think, by a desire to actually create something lasting, or by ego and self-promotion? I mean, this is something that Nicholas touched upon earlier, but what do you think?
I mean, I think reality TV is one version of the kind of algorithmic entertainment that people consume now.
But they're real estate, like,
Oh, yeah. Selling Sunset.
The realtor?
Yeah, Selling Sunset.
The realtor show?
The real estate agency.
Yeah, I've seen that.
The Selling Sunset. It's booming, you know? People love that.
At this point, it doesn't even matter if it's good or not. It's just that people want to be in the state of consuming entertainment, which, by the way, is very similar to what happens with pathological gamblers. They even want to lose because then they have an excuse to stay in the game, right? So that's a very similar kind of thing. I think that almost everybody can relate to, where you're scrolling through a digital medium and you're not enjoying yourself and you wish you could stop, and yet it's very difficult to stop.
I still find myself just like kind of scrolling for no reason. I wake up and I scroll, or I'm bored and I scroll.
I start scrolling in my sleep. I feel like my thumb is unconsciously just moving like this, and I'd wake up and I'd see like there's no phone in my hand. My thumb was just moving.
It feels inescapable, It's like no matter what you do, no matter how happy I am with my life, it's for me, it's not escapism. It's genuinely just like I have just this constant urge to be on my phone.
So it's like, it's very weird,
But let's say you even manage to, get off your phone and put it down, and then you go out and look for other things to do or other forms of salience or reward or attractiveness. And the problem is that there's nothing there because we've invested all of our time, energy, and creativity into the virtual world, leeching our real life existence of its interest and its salience. And then, the Real Housewives or whatever, I mean, that's such an interesting form of entertainment on so many levels. On the one hand, it's interesting at how popular it is, even though it's really not very good, right? I mean, these are just sort of not very, how to put it, these are sort of average people, and yet we're obsessed with their lives. And now a very common kind of TikTok video or short form YouTube is like people brushing their teeth in the morning, or people getting ready to go to work. So it's a kind of degeneration of what people find entertaining, which a generation ago, nobody would have watched that.
I think if there's something that makes me zone out, it's those self-help gurus. Like, not that I'm listening because I'm actually learning, but sometimes I just want to hear the garbage that they have to say so that I react, and I'm like, but who actually is listening to these people, and why? Like, literally, why? And there was this trend where you have water and a banana and you're having your morning routine. What has the world come to?
It's the medium. The medium itself is engaging, plus the loneliness, the isolation. And I think this is so fascinating when you look at how people are with their phones. I mean, phones are like pacifiers. They're these alive objects that people don't want to be separated from. They're afraid, actually, to leave them behind. The attachment is as much to the object that's the conduit of the reward as it is to the object itself.
So what does this all say about us?
It gets back to, Marshall McLuhan said, his original, famous quote was,
Medium is the message.
The medium is the message, yeah.
The medium is the message, meaning that we're entranced by the medium itself. The medium itself has hijacked our reward pathways. We are caught in this sort of reward loop, this hedonic treadmill that we don't even really see.
If entertainment was a person that I had a relationship with, I think she would be a very toxic best friend. Like, I need to cut her off from my life because I know how much harm she's doing. Like, she's trying to capture all of my attention, and I'm like, I need to keep some attention for productive things. I need to learn. And she's like, no, you have to come with me and meet these people and like entertain yourself or amuse yourself. You need fashion, you need drama, She's the type that gossips a lot, and I feel like my parents don't like my relationship with entertainment, and they're not about it.
Nicholas?
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's why, I feel it in my own life that it used to be quite natural for me to sit down and immerse myself in a book and turn page after page, and it becomes harder and harder when you've been trained by your devices to expect new, different kinds of stimuli all the time.
Yeah, Marya, you're nodding along. You agree.
It's important to understand the problems and the very real concerns that come with this. And I really think it's important to have conversations about what are we going to do about it in terms of like, how are we going to engage? How are we going to ensure that, you know, our values, for example, are represented in entertainment? There's ways that you can do that as an individual. There's ways you can do that as a family. There's ways you can do that as a society or a state. But how do we really negotiate as individuals and societies our relationships to entertainment? Because it's here to stay.
Marya, let me ask you this then. Is entertainment creating culture, or do you think culture is reflecting entertainment?
I think that entertainment is part of culture. The way I define culture is kind of this more broad sense of like, you know, our beliefs, our values, our way of life. Culture had a much stronger ability to influence what our entertainment was because there was space and time and the ability to kind of regulate and control. Now I think we're at the flip end where technology is really shaping our culture. How do we see agency in that and start to really think about managing that?
What do you think, Nicholas, about this relationship between culture and entertainment?
I think I agree that increasingly it's the technology that is shaping both of those things, shaping entertainment, but also shaping culture. It's less about the actual artist or the writer or the film director being the kind of cultural icons who you could look to as kind of having a direct influence over what people were talking about, how people were thinking about things. And it's more the technology, the medium itself that is shaping culture today, which I think is an unhealthy situation. You know, I agree that none of this is probably going to go away, but there is a chance that at some point a young generation will say, this is incredibly oppressive. I don't want to walk around with a phone with me all the time. And you'll see a countercultural movement that will actually reject it all and look at it as this oppressive force. I don't know.
I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think that can happen. There are some things that are reversible. Technology is not one of them. With technology, you're always going to advance.
It's very difficult. Once social norms have been shaped by the technology, by the medium, it's very difficult, and I think we see this today, to make the kind of changes that you're talking about, whether it's at a governmental level or a personal level, as important as that is.
Anna, earlier on, you also spoke about boredom. I wonder if you can just elaborate a little bit on that and tell us the impact that boredom has in kind of the entertainment that we're consuming and the way that we consume it.
We have almost no capacity as modern humans to tolerate boredom of any kind because it's so easy to entertain and distract ourselves. But I feel like that's a real loss. Boredom is really the midwife of creativity.
That's so true.
That's so true,
I agree.
yeah.
So you can't rush art. I genuinely feel like at some point, I'm like, why am I even on my phone? I'm not even actively processing what I'm looking at. When I had that realization, which is not too long ago actually, I'd step away from my phone. I'd care for my cats. I'd be busy with my hands. So it's not necessarily anything creative, but I'd be busy with my hands. And during that time, I don't listen to anything else.
The moment when I'm bored, I'm always going to be glued to my screen, or I look for entertainment on my screen. I feel as if technology is taking a lot away from us. It's eating our brains, basically.
Humans are not meant to be stimulated this much as we're stimulated today. Which is why I think our age, Gen Z and beyond, is very different from any generation that has been before us. And that's why we can't do a comparison of us now and before. I'm going through a digital age that has never existed before.
I will say that when I talk to Gen Z or Gen Alpha or these kind of like upcoming generations, I often find them more developed and nuanced than older generations are. And I think actually because of their exposure to difference and issues and questions around all sorts of things around identity and experiences and hobbies, that they tend to be a lot more sophisticated. There's something about what you said. I love that about boredom is the midwife of creativity, because I believe that. I really strongly, and I've seen it in like the creative process. There's a way in which potentially original thought is something that requires space and time and reflection for. But I don't think that boredom is necessarily needed for self-development. If you look at younger generations, the level of sophistication that they often have when it comes to kind of conversations about how they've thought about themselves and what is meaningful to them and how they think about the world, because of their exposure and because of the level of discourse that young people are often having, they tend to actually, I think, be way ahead of like where I was at their age, you know?
All right, thank you so much. Well, throughout this debate, our group of students and recent graduates has been carefully listening to your ideas and your arguments. And next, I'll join them as they reflect and deliberate on what they've just heard. And after their discussion, they'll return to share their own perspectives along with questions and challenges.
Lean, confessionals, what was it called? Entertainment.
Post-Act 1.
Post-Act 1. Honestly, I loved how they were going back and forth in like such a refreshing manner. I'd probably ask the guests what they think, like how they imagine the world would be from an optimistic viewpoint. Like, how do you think the people will cope? There's a general consensus that they want to reach to an optimistic point where like, okay, people will adapt, but I want to see what you think or how you visualize this adaptation would be. How will it be realistically implemented? Because you can't just say companies will regulate because this is, you know, their source of income. You can't say people will stop because not everyone is conscious, and even if they're conscious, not everyone really cares. They're like, let it suck my soul, you know?
Hey guys! So, guys, you heard from our speakers a short while ago on what entertainment means today and whether it's really a powerful sort of cultural force or an escape that's reshaping how we think, how we feel, and how we connect. So, Amir, I'll ask you first. Dr. Anna said that boredom, this is how she described it, boredom is the midwife of creativity. What do you think of that statement? And also, do you think that we need to value freedom a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. We can all kind of relate to the feeling of just kind of being really overstimulated. We consume all this stuff on our phones all day, but then we finish the end of the day and then you think, wow, like I did nothing. A day where I feel really satisfied is actually a day where I wake up, clean my room, read part of a book, eat, and then go to sleep. It's a very quote-unquote boring day. I didn't do anything particularly exciting, but I feel much more satisfied, much more fulfilled by the end of it. I feel like I've done something, I've learned something.
Do you guys here feel the same? Yeah, Carl?
I definitely agree with Amir, because I think the key point is coming in touch back with reality, so leaving your screen. I never feel fulfilled, you know, whenever I'm on my phone. As much as I'm consuming so much information, whether it's like self-help videos or whatever it is that they're trying to teach me, I never feel like those are things that are really grounded. So one thing I enjoy doing when I'm not on my phone is stargazing, for example, or just going out for a walk. That's what really brings you back to the world, to really reconnect. And I think that's what we need more. As a kid, I was always very curious. I would watch ants for the whole day, and I found that particularly interesting.
So I'm wondering if the reason we feel fulfilled when we're not using these things or we're not like engaging with these forms of entertainment, is it because we're like more mindful, we're not being oversensitized, we're intentional?
Tayama, what do you think?
For me, I totally understand this culture that we have of self-gratification, short-term gratification that we gain from our cell phone. I think it's like the panelists were mentioning, it's driven by the medium. I feel like reading a book as a form of entertainment is fundamentally different from, like, for example, binging Netflix because of the medium itself. With books, you're like going line by line. There's like linear, rational thinking. You have time to think. But what we're doing with like binging is not only are we overstimulated, but just like looking at it in face value, we're not really going into it. So definitely when the panelists were talking about the medium, I agree with them.
Based off of what Tayama said, and it makes me think about the difference between typographic mind and the digital mind. Typographic mind, not too long ago, just like a few decades back, we were used to like prolonged sessions of deep concentration, of being able to follow a complex thought for like pages on end. Whereas digital mind nowadays, we're so used to like immediacy, virality, brevity, self-promotion. We've lost that ability to be grounded, to be mindful, to be in tune, to engage with what we consume.
The way you think, the way you organize your thoughts, the way you even process information changed. It went from just reading and being waiting for the end to form a proper opinion. It's just jumping to conclusions. People are like, okay, but then what? Why? Because they're used to very short form of content that tells them the result from the beginning.
Nada and Wahed, I'd like to hear from you guys. Nada, what do you think?
I think that when we have our phones, it's not only this addiction, but also the idea of obligation. You know, somebody texts you, you feel you need to answer, maybe for an emergency, whatever it may be, there's this sense of obligation. But if we take that and we put it to the side and we don't give ourselves that obligation, we are able to do whatever we deem as entertaining, because don't forget, it is subjective.
So do you get fulfilled from entertainment?
I like to watch, some shows here and there after working a long day, just like mindless television.
Okay.
I like these kind
Diplomatic
of things.
answer.
Yes.
Okay, Wahed.
I think for me, I believe in us as humans being together. And for me, that's like the greatest form of entertainment. And now we have like the digital world and we have the physical world, where I find inspiration from the digital world and I bring it to the real world.
Okay, Amir, go ahead.
I think on what Teama said, I think there has to sort of be a distinction between passive and active, engagement with entertainment. When we're constantly scrolling, we're not really consenting sort of to whatever the next reel we're going to see is. We're just kind of going, whatever comes. But, when you intently, watch a movie and try to understand its meaning, when you sit down and listen to a song, or, when you read a book, which is like just inherently intentional, right? It has a much different impact than just scrolling. We're seeing in a lot of, public life, the death of sort of these third spaces in which people can interact with each other. For example, in the United States, we're seeing a decline in movie theaters because it's just kind of not financially, efficient to kind of continue running these things. We're subscribing to everything now. There's subscriptions everywhere, instead of you actually owning these things, intentionally consuming this stuff.
I'm part of a generation who get to see the effects of social media. At some point, I saw it's making me stupid. I cannot think for myself. It's other people's opinions that constantly pop up on my page that are now shaping the way I think. And so this topic really became important to me because it's important to break free from this particular cycle because we become mindless zombies.
Not too long ago I read this book. The author said was that there is mediums or forms of entertainment that we give our attention to, i.e. books. But just like Amir mentioned, there is forms of entertainment that we don't consent to, which I believe are most of the social media applications. One of the guests brought up this idea that these algorithms feed into our desire, which I didn't quite agree with because I think so much of our desire nowadays is engineered by these very platforms. Yes, they do keep track of our habits and our behavioral patterns on these applications, but I think so many of our behaviors are a result of what we're being fed. I don't think they're organic or natural to our inclination as humans. Yeah, I just woke up one day and I was like, I need to change my life around, do a 180, deleted all social media and didn't look back for like 2 years. There was so much introspection that happened during those 2 years, so much self-discovery. For the first time in like a few years, I had felt present in my body, present in like the world around me.
I'm asking myself a question where, are we using social media or is it using us in a way? Are they the ones that are getting data from us, trying to make more money from us, using us as numbers to get what they want?
I think my biggest question when it comes to entertainment is what are we seeking? And we are making an active choice to seek something. Now, if we're seeking to mentally stimulate ourselves, maybe by reading a book, then that is what we're seeking. And that's the form of entertainment that we want at that moment. But there are moments where maybe I've had long days of studios and I really just want to watch something that's quote unquote trash and something that's brain rot and almost consume.
You don't want to use
passive,
your brain.
Yeah, I don't want to use my brain.
So in this era of reality TV, has entertainment, do you guys think it's become driven by a desire to actually create something lasting or by ego and self-promotion?
Entertainment has lost the art aspect to it. Most entertainment at the end of the day is supposed to be about the human experience. And the problem is right now is because of where the incentives are, it's not heading in that direction.
A lot of times when I do want to watch a film in a cinema, it often comes because of what I've seen on social media. This film being hyped up and talked about. And so my counter question to Amir would be, if you go to a cinema and there's a film on existentialism and talks about you questioning who you are, would you watch that? Or would you watch a film that is hyped, talked about in the social media, like an Oppenheimer or a Barbie? Would you want to go watch that to be able to then form an opinion on that? What choice do you make in that position?
It's got to be Oppenheimer because I actually went into this not knowing what I'm watching. I just went in there for the trends, but it was so good. I was very invested in every clip that I did not even realize it was like 2 or 3 hours long.
Everyone was blown away by the direction, by the message behind the movie.
When there was absolutely no sound and the bomb went off, that was so good.
6, 5.
I could hear my own breathing. The experience, it was so immersive. Like, this is how film should be made.
Entertainment back then was really intentional because people, like we've been saying, sought that out. So the double meanings, the little hidden messages, the small piece of paper falling off, what did that mean? A lot of people sought that, and society in general were focused on these things. But nowadays, because of the rise in short form content, we're not necessarily actively seeking out that thing that requires us to focus and ponder and think. No, just move on. What's the next topic? What's the next thing that's gonna happen? Okay, and then the movie finished, the craziest part is over, just end it off. Don't even tell us what happens after.
I mean, yeah, but I think that's because of the fast pace of the world. So
Exactly.
right now, everything works on the 15 seconds of fame.
Mm-hmm.
So now what big entertainment firms do is they make something boost up, it's super popular, and then it falls off, and they're like, guys, we're gonna do season 2 or part 2, and then it goes up again, and then it falls down, season 3, and they keep doing that. And I think it's, I blame the world, the modern world.
And that's
its
exactly the
fast pace.
problem. We're now chasing more of the trends than actual meaning. I don't necessarily think we should say the burden is primarily on us as the consumers and actively looking, because I think about you're randomly scrolling, random day, Instagram, you see, oh, this person saying, hey, I have a Bugatti. You scroll again, hey, I have yachts, I have a big house, I have this. Like, you feel inadequate, you know, or you see someone prettier than you and you then look in the mirror and you're like, why do these people look so happy? Even in the reality shows. The problem is these companies, because of what is trending, are now taking us away from that human experience where we get to appreciate what we have, and they push more of this content that dissociates us from the world.
Yeah, I think the idea that it's chasing what we desire, that's what the algorithm is, I would disagree. It's chasing what provides the most money for the company. Your desire and what you actually spend time doing are two different things. I might want to read books more often or watch long form videos, but the reality is I'm about to get stuck, you know, for 2 hours doom scrolling on my phone. Like what was mentioned, I mean, it's a drug, it's addicting. Like, this is its job.
Nada, I'll ask you and Tayama also. Is global entertainment then evolving, do you think, or is it eroding cultural depth and meaning?
We are very, very, very adaptable. Human beings can adapt to these different changes. Whether or not it's a progression or a regression, I really think it just depends, because, you know, we're sitting here with social media everywhere and saying, well, I miss how it was back then. But the newer generation, they don't have a back then. The younger generation is never going to remember their lives the same way that we're remembering ours, you know? And social media was introduced when we started growing up, not from when we were born.
I feel like global entertainment is homogenizing entertainment as an art form. What I've noticed was that even in our discussion, when we talk about entertainment, we talk about the West. For example, when you mention reality TV, we automatically think of Kim Kardashian or the Housewives of Beverly Hills. What about our local entertainment? So true. So with global entertainment, I feel like it's removing cultural diversity of entertainment, because of course our local entertainment cannot compete with the high production of the Hollywood, of the Western world. So I feel like it is definitely removing a lot of diversity that we have among ourselves.
I think,
yes, sir.
I feel like entertainment is a privilege. I'm privileged to use entertainment to learn about other cultures, to learn other languages. So I think entertainment is sent from heaven, basically, because I can learn so many languages while watching TV shows. The TV shows I watch, they inspire something in me. The Chinese TV shows I watch, it's very high quality art. It takes me back to 1200s or something. Like, I genuinely feel like I'm not here, and that's a good thing. Entertainment, it really does help, you know, when you're in that space where a lot of times you don't feel support from your own community or people around you. You can really have a connection with specific group or people or TV show or movie through internet.
So look, Sarah just gave us, told us what she watches, okay? I want all of you guys to kind of tell me, I'll start with you, Huda, next. What kind of entertainment are you consuming? Give me specific examples.
My form of entertainment always is novels. I personally really enjoy books, particularly historical fiction novels of my region. I really like Kamila Shamsi. I really like Khalid Hosseini. And then if I'm talking about digital entertainment, I always resort back to the old school shows. I know not everybody will agree, but maybe Friends or The Office or The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, like these are shows that I really, really enjoy. For me, I listen to a lot of my regional music, but I think one song that I do listen to a lot, or like the genre, anything that gets me riled up, pumped up. So extremely fast-paced, extremely dense with emotion and rich with a lot of depth.
Okay, this side of the room, Wahed, what are you consuming?
I think for me, it's a mix. It just depends on the day. Like on some days, I'm like, what's happening in the business world? On other days, I'm just like a poet. I'm looking at poetry. And one thing to touch on, it's just amazing how the modern era is allowing us to access all these things in our fingertips.
Okay, so how? What about you?
For the most part, nonfiction. I love consuming essays, long-form essays or long-written essays, mostly like magical, surrealism, that sort of thing.
Okay, Carl?
I would say video games, and they're different genres. So as for me, I believe with each video game, whether it's celebrated or criticized, there's always going to be a lesson. Playing a game like Assassin's Creed, where I get to go back in time and see ancient buildings, use an ancient character and learn about ancient civilizations. Where I play a game like Metal Gear, where I get to learn about the current state of the world, nuclear wars, and the impending dangers of people killing each other. I mainly just use video games because I believe there's a deeper story they tell about our society, how we tell stories, and how you can have that immersive experience. I used to find meaning in games like Call of Duty because you actually get to see how evil people can be, how people can create weapons of mass destruction, kill other people, and how even within those particular games, they try to paint people as the good guys and the bad guys, and how that has been very polarizing towards society. I would like to see a trajectory in which, with video games being created, they move away from these battle royales, these online things where, at least while I was growing up, video games really taught me a lot, whether it's in terms of how to speak, how to interact, and I believe they should go back to that direction instead of just milking money from people.
Amir, what are you consuming?
First, I agree with Carl. I also consume video games. The interesting thing about it is because it's so active, it really helps you kind of put yourself in a world that you wouldn't have otherwise imagined. The other thing is, again, books, nonfiction. I read a lot of history books. When it comes to literature, I try to challenge myself to read more fiction, but I mostly just read poetry, like Arabic poetry, so Nizar Qabbani, Mahmoud Darwish, Nazik al-Malaika. And then for TV shows and movies, I try to get myself to kind of watch more of the quote-unquote classics or longer form movies with, deeper messages. But then, of course, I can't help but watching Friends or something along those lines. So
Friends is deep.
So no mindless TV here, right? That's not what I'm hearing from any of you guys.
Friends is not, like, compared to modern media, Friends is nowhere near mindless. I mean, it's a sitcom at the end of the day, but, there's thought put into it for sure.
Kardashians, though, I will say.
So
it depends
like
on
mindless.
the day. But it depends on the day. It depends, yeah.
When you consume this stuff, are you doing it to numb yourself, numb your imagination, or is it actually fueling creativity and wonder? Nada, and tell us what you're consuming.
I like older cartoons. I watched Family Guy maybe a million times. I love Archer. It's really funny. I love these kind of things. But when I'm not mindlessly watching things, I really like crime documentaries and psychological thrillers, things like this. But when I'm reading, I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of... I have a book that's on a bunch of experiments done in psychology. It's all just psychology stuff because it's like my only interest.
So are you consuming this to numb your imagination, if you can say that, or?
I wouldn't necessarily say numb my imagination. I think when it comes to mindless TV, for example, after working a long day, I just like want to go to sleep. Like this is just something, background noise kind of thing. But on a more conscious level, when I want to be entertained, I like to do, to watch these crime documentaries or to read these psychology books because first of all, it's an interest that I have, but I'm learning something. It does have an impact on my life. I'm learning something. I want to study to be a counselor. It's going to help me with my career, but it's also going to entertain me at the same time.
Okay. I just wanted to add, specifically because I struggle with anxiety and I have for a while, but when I look at when I'm anxious, I don't necessarily seek forms of entertainment for numbing because my forms of entertainment are usually the ones that slow my brain down. So it would usually be painting or walking or drawing or coloring, things that will slow my mind and my mental processes. It's a conscious thought. I could very well go to social media and I know for a moment I could forget that. I just choose not to look at it from that perspective, and I choose to cater to my thoughts and realize that at this moment, what will help me will be actively seeking modes of entertainment that will slow my mental processes instead of, going into social media or... If I look at films, I think any film that has any form of representation of somebody who suffers from anxiety does make me feel very seen, and it almost validates my emotions and experiences, and I don't feel so isolated in that moment. And an example of this actually would be the Inside Out 2. One of the emotions in Inside Out 2 was anxiety.
Hello! I'm anxiety. Where can I put my stuff?
And I remember for the longest time, I couldn't make my parents understand what I was going through. And I made my father watch that film. I said, if you want to really understand how my mind works, I think you should watch it.
Guys, I'm really impressed with the movies and the books and, everything that you guys are talking about. But show of hands, how many of you are watching Love is Blind?
Love is Blind, Habibi.
All right.
I've seen that one.
Whichever version it is.
I have seen it.
I've seen it as well.
I've seen a few episodes.
Come on, guys, be honest. Show of hands.
I have no idea what that is.
1, 4. Wahed, I see you smiling.
Guys.
Clips count.
I have no idea what that is.
No, he watched like something else.
Dubai Bling.
I was Dubai Bling.
Oh,
that's
good.
even worse.
Yes.
It was nice. I liked it.
I liked it. Selling Sunset, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
he watched Selling Sunset. Now that's brain rot.
Okay, fine. So I would say half are watching this reality TV, right? And half are not. So do you guys think, are you using entertainment to find a sense of meaning, or are you getting it elsewhere? Carl?
I think it always depends with the context. You can find meaning, you cannot find meaning. So once again, because I think I'm the only one who might speak about video games, I usually tend to find meaning behind them, behind the plots, the story, and the characters. But sometimes you don't really want to search for meaning. You're coming from a tough exam on a Thursday. I don't think I want to go back home and search for meaning. I just want to play FIFA and hopefully not lose and just unwind.
And watch Love is Blind.
No, I don't.
No?
I just wanna say, like, it was very interesting when you were talking about the things that help you not feel as anxious. I tend to work better when listening to rain sounds.
Yes.
And if I want to shut my brain off, I like to clean. But if there's nothing to clean, I'll watch videos of people cleaning.
Same. But as when you're talking about mindless content, and for example, Kardashians, this is going to sound really weird, but the reason why I watch it is because I don't have sisters. And I love seeing sisters and that dynamic and fights, and because I've never seen that. I've only had brothers. So for me, in that moment, I'm not searching for meaning. It's more so living an experience that otherwise I wouldn't.
I think in my experience, I believe how you do one thing is how you do everything. I don't think meaning is something that you search for or something to be sought. It's the action in of itself. The fact that you choose to, let's say, passively consume something, right? That's, yes, you might not be searching for meaning in of that thing, but the fact that that's what you're resorting to in of itself is what you deem meaning for you as a person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like that sounds like a...
No, but in that moment,
yes.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
I'm not sure. I think there's meaning in everything, you know? So let's say you watch a bad episode, and then in the future, you're going to know what to expect of a good episode. So I'd say there's meaning in everything.
These kind of forms of entertainment where we have books and movies that immerse us in other cultures, I think can definitely help us get perspective on other cultures. Not a lot of people know much about every single culture. We can't say that we know everything about everybody.
Her connection with Chinese
right?
culture. She's from Pakistan.
So we're able to...
I learned half my Chinese too.
Exactly. So we're able to make these connections with people and understand where people come from when they say certain things. because for me, when we're sitting here and we're debating, we're not all from the same country, right? And so I can understand, for example, if somebody has a specific mindset or a specific opinion on something that I might not agree with, I can take into account, okay, well, we have this cultural difference, or we have this language barrier, or we have whatever it may be. Entertainment definitely helps with that because of how interconnected we are. It has its ups and downs, but something that I kind of wanted to draw back from what the guest had said, entertainment is going to stay this way. We're not going to regress in terms of material technology and things like that. So what do we do?
Yeah, Marya said the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah.
But Soha, go ahead.
I'd argue global entertainment is devolving, and that's because so much of what we consume nowadays is either passive or mindless, to the extent where what was once used as like a training ground for empathy and understanding, i.e. like films and books, that's no longer the case. Entertainment in my family was reading. I come from a family of readers. We love reading books. My dad's a computer scientist, so I grew up with technology all around me. Growing up, like despite the fact that I grew up around technology, my dad would always encourage us to like read more books, like go outside. So I think the fact that the discipline came from him kind of reflected onto the way that I used technology when I grew up.
Guys, this has been a really good conversation, a really eye-opening conversation, I feel. But it's not over yet. So are you guys ready to meet the speakers and tell them what you think?
Yes.
Okay, let's go. So we heard some compelling arguments from our speakers a short while ago, and then our students took time to reflect and challenge and deliberate on the ideas that you guys had put forward earlier on. But I asked the students what they were consuming, what their entertainment vice was, and they gave some pretty eye-opening answers. I'd like to ask you guys the same thing. Nicholas, I'll start with you.
It varies. TV series like The Last of Us. Recently, on the plane, I started watching The Day of the Jackal with Eddie Redmayne. So, typical stuff.
Anna, what about you?
I tend to watch YouTube podcasts about politics.
Marya?
When I was at Disney, I had to watch every piece of Disney content. So I watched nothing except for Disney, which was, Disney owns a lot of things, so it was a lot of content. But more recently, I've been able to just spend time doing streaming, television, film. I love reading, so I do all of that. And then, Instagram. I don't have TikTok, so,
When you were at Disney, that was work, right?
Oh, I loved it, though. I'm like an actual, we own Marvel and Lucas and Pixar, and that was some of my favorite films and television before I joined. So I loved working on that. I still love that stuff. I just watched, next actually on my list is The Last of Us.
A lot of you guys are nodding along. Are you not surprised by these answers?
Not really.
I mean, I just kind of, just the political podcast thing was just kind of relatable. I always lament the rise of politics as entertainment, but I'm like a massive hypocrite. And so I watch that kind of content. Obviously, I try to keep it, not too kind of inflammatory, but I can't lie, every once in a while I do catch myself watching a Piers Morgan debate. So
likewise. Marya, back to the work that you do. And this is something, in fact, that the students brought up. So I'd like to put kind of their thoughts to you, and perhaps you can just expand a little bit on the issue of representation and diversity, right? A lot of people say, and they're already nodding along, so I know they have a lot to say about this. Some people say there's just not enough representation, not enough diversity in our entertainment. How do you answer that?
My job was actually to try to increase that. Hollywood, which is where I come from, is very much an American business, right? And so it is really shaped by kind of U.S. audiences and also U.S. creatives. There has been a strong push for diversity in the last decade. And you see that not just in terms of who's actually playing characters, but actually who are the creatives behind the scenes, right? The writers, the directors, the producers, all of that has really drastically shifted. At Disney, one of the things that I was hopeful for was actually to be representative of the globe, right? And to actually show kind of the true kind of global diversity. However, what is happening now in entertainment, and specifically in film and television is a massive contraction. So there is one of the things that new media has done is disrupted traditional models of entertainment. And so we had a massive, what would be called like a gold rush for entertainment pre-COVID and after COVID, the golden age of television with streaming platforms. But there has been a huge reduction of content being made in the last year or two because financially, all of the kind of things that were leading to that gold rush have gone away. For example, people don't go to theaters in the same way that they used to. And so a lot of, Disney had, I think, $5 or $6 billion movies in 2019. Now a studio is lucky if they have $1 billion movie, right? And that's a huge financial difference. A lot of jobs have gone away, a lot of content has gone away, and what that means for diverse storytellers is they're seeing much less opportunity. And so that is a challenge that we're currently facing when it comes to representation.
With that rise in diverse storytellers and writers, recently, I feel as though a lot of the content that I've seen, in terms of like movies and TV shows and stuff, yes, it's diverse in character and stuff like that, but it's not accurate.
Diverse in storytelling.
Yes, like I feel as though, like there will be, for example, like I'm a Muslim, right? So I'll see a hijabi on a show, but like she'll take it off because she's oppressed and she drinks alcohol and all these kind of things that just isn't culturally accurate. Why does the diversity mean inaccuracy?
Every company is different. Right? There's no, unfortunately, best practices yet within the industry around like how to do this. So the team that I led at Disney was one of the only teams in the industry where there was a really clear methodology that we had around representation. We had over 100 consultants representing different communities and issue areas. We worked on 250 movies a year, and every piece of content had to, on the film studio side, had to go through our team. But most studios don't have things like that. Right. And so what that means is that they are leaning on maybe like one person who represents that identity. And as we know, one person can't represent an entire community, right? And so one of the things that we did when we were working on content was actually really making sure that there were teams of people to ensure that kind of accuracy and representation.
But I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it just because they don't have access to like a group to talk to, can't they do their own research still?
There's like two things I would say. The first is that most and film and television are very different. Even someone like you and me, right? Like say we're working on a piece of content. We're not really gonna know all of our gaps. And so people might do a good faith effort to really ensure accuracy and think that they're doing a good job. One of the things I experienced when I first started working in Hollywood was there was a ton of people who purported to be experts from communities who actually were not and would give like horrible advice. These are all things that require a level of sensitivity and education.
I feel like if anything, there's a lack of reach for that representation. People don't actively seek to see that difference. They don't actively seek to see the different viewpoints and different places around the world, the different cultures, the different people. If people are saying that, oh, there isn't enough representation, no, you're not looking for it enough.
So I love movies, I grew up on Marvel and I've watched almost every single Marvel movie with my friends and my family.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder, because back in 2019, 2020, during that age, we had the Endgame, which was one of the best Marvel movies ever made.
Yeah.
But after that time, everything from Marvel has been, I would say, unique. I wouldn't go with my friends to a theater, pay money and watch it. And I'm wondering if it's because of the age or if it's just because something behind the scenes has changed and now the content is just bad.
So I will speak to this, and obviously I don't represent Disney. Disney Plus was launched right around that time. And Marvel, along with Star Wars, Lucasfilm, were asked to produce a lot more content than they normally would have to fulfill the demands of a streaming service, right? And what ends up happening when you try to do quantity is you see a decrease in quality. And so there has now been a correction, and this is all very publicly talked about in the trades, where Marvel has drastically decreased their amount of content. And I'd love for you to watch Thunderbolts, the new Avengers, and let me know what you think. But I do think that as you see the decrease, you'll see more of that return hopefully to quality.
You know, when I was speaking to the students, you guys were all talking about this issue of boredom and how it impacts or doesn't the entertainment that you consume. Who wants to share their viewpoints with Anna?
I was listening to the guests, and you said something very interesting, that boredom is the midwife of creativity. I think boredom definitely is a good thing. And the reason why I say that is because we exist in an age where we are overly stimulated by the content that is around us. And so if we do find pockets where we essentially don't have anything to do and we do feel bored, I don't feel any emotion is a bad emotion. I think it's an emotion that is there for a reason. In moments where I do find myself bored, I think those are moments that I like to term more as solitary and almost peaceful, because I feel like the noise around me just doesn't exist, and so I can just be in my solitary confinement and enjoy that space. Myself, I'm a designer. I tend to resort to those resources, whether it's Architectural Digest or Pinterest, not out of boredom, but it's an active quest to seek that out. And I think for me, that's what aids my creativity in that aspect.
That's such a beautiful point, because I don't mean to suggest at all that there's no way to utilize the internet or digital media in a creative way. In fact, it's a wonderful source of creativity if we orient the right way around it. And when I talk to people about how to have a healthier relationship with the technology, one of the tricks and tips that I often talk about is, before you actually open your computer and go on to the internet, make a list of what it is you plan to do there. Yeah, so that you don't get lost down the rabbit holes. You know, you're really exemplifying that.
I mean, I think on that, when you kind of intentionally consume media like that, that's very inconvenient for the media companies, right? They don't want you to be doing that. So when we talk about personal agency, for example, in the media, we have to keep in mind that they want you to go on Reels, to go on TikTok, and to just get lost in the feed of meaningless information. You weren't seeking out anything particular on TikTok. You're just kind of scrolling with no real idea in your head. I do strongly believe that when you do make that conscious decision to go consume something else, you're really, going after the wallets of these media companies. You're basically saying, like, look, I'm not going to be trapped in this cycle of basically giving you my personal data and feeding you advertising space.
We mustn't forget that there's also this war on attention. Every single platform is trying to make sure that the second or the millisecond that you get bored, there's an alternative. You have it with YouTube. If you're bored for even a split second or so, there's a list of recommendations on the right-hand side of your screen ready to feed you something new. Again, same with TikTok. You've got the infinite scroll option. I think what it's taking from us is our attention spans, RIP, our ability to retain and engaging in complex thought.
Taking what Amir and Soha said, I actually have a question for our guests here. So you know how the internet or social media nowadays, the new entertainment is designed to be addictive. And there's this kind of controversy of, should it be on the consumers and how they should limit themselves, or should it be on the companies? And you guys did mention the fact that you want to find a solution. You want to reimagine how the future would look like from a more optimistic view. So I'd like to know what your optimistic view would be.
Nicholas, take that on.
My optimistic view would be, I don't think government regulation is going to fundamentally change behavior. That doesn't mean there aren't good regulations that I can imagine that could be placed on the companies. But I think ultimately the onus is going to be on behavior of the users. Some younger generation will come along and say, this is oppressive and we don't want to do it anymore. It'll be like the 1960s kind of countercultural, that the whole internet, social media will be seen as a kind of digital industrial complex, and it will be rejected.
I do have a question, which also connects to this. So earlier on, you did mention, at least there was a bit of a contention between, are these media companies necessarily feeding us the information that comes, or it's us who choose to get the certain information? What do you think is the role that has been taken by these media companies to curate how you think by the kind of content they are feeding you?
So there's a couple of aspects to this. One is the whole algorithm question. And clearly what the companies are doing, in your experience, is probing And if you make a choice, you're going to see that choice more. And then if you don't choose it, that will slowly go away. So they're constantly trying to read your mind, fundamentally. At the same time, they're trying to take away from you your own choice about what you want to look at in order for it to become this kind of reaction. You just keep scrolling through. Even if you're not really that interested, they want to keep you on screen on their own service as much as possible. And that's what it's all geared toward.
And that brings me to my point to Anna. You deal with people who you say are addicted to entertainment and social media. What have you seen in your practice that you can share with us?
I think addiction is a spectrum, and we can learn a lot by looking at some of the most severe cases. And what we see clinically is people's lives, including young people like yourselves, who have really had their lives derailed by the addiction to the digital media. Now, the vast majority of people who use digital media will realize, oh boy, I've watched too many cat videos. I think I need to recalibrate, right? But there is a subset of vulnerable people who, even when they recognize they need to change the behavior, are really unable to, get progressively more depressed, more anxious, in some cases suicidal, can't stop even when they want to. It's very clear that if we just wait for individuals to change their behavior, we're not going to get to the place we need to get to. It's got to be both a bottom-up and a top-down solution, which means that we need governments and lawmakers and larger institutions to help us create guardrails around consumption, especially for kids whose developing brains are more vulnerable. The companies that make and profit from digital media certainly must be held accountable.
Sundus, do you see this addiction? I'm not asking any of you guys to name and shame here, but in general, do you see this addiction amongst your peer groups?
100%, definitely. I do find that sometimes there is this need to constantly consume. And I feel sometimes it goes away from even being entertained and we're just passively watching.
Tayama, what about you?
For me, I also definitely agree with Sundus. I feel like this curated algorithm that's on social media is kind of making us in this loop of just scrolling and not having like a linear line of thought. I feel like society itself is being more illiterate. I have a question about how we can have some agency in the relationship between us and modern entertainment. Modern entertainment right now is unescapable. I feel like we cannot just opt out of it. Would my generation not be able to be saved? Just a question to both of you guys.
I mean, I think every individual has the ability to regulate their use of anything. The expectation that everybody's online all the time pretty much is now built into society. It's a norm. It's built into all sorts of processes, governmental processes, educational processes. It becomes very, very difficult when everybody has adapted to having everything at their fingertips, unlimited amounts of stimulus coming simultaneously at them at a high speed and high volume, to suddenly tell society, no, we're going to back away from that. Even if society as a whole thinks that that's a good idea, it's very, very hard to do that.
Yeah, and I would just add in terms of practical tips in your own lives, I recommend that you do something that I call the regret principle. So think about, is there a form of digital media that you regret how much time you spend there? Are there opportunity costs, other things you wish you were doing? And that you're not doing because you're on that form of digital media. And then I invite you to do an experiment and give it up for a month. Why a month? Because that's, in general, in my experience, the amount of time it takes to sort of reset reward pathways and begin to see, to have enough distance from that behavior to say, oh, gee, I'm not really sure that's achieving what I hoped it would achieve.
Honestly, I've been considering the break, and even after what she said, I feel like I can consider it, but I don't think I will. It's not in my book. I don't think. While I do agree that I am very impacted by social media, the addiction is there. I'm not gonna deny it. I do try my best to limit myself. I feel like that's enough, especially because when I get focused, when I get into something that I'm doing, which is a conscious effort to stay away from social media, I get really into it. So I feel like that's fine.
Sarah, could you try it? And what do you want to say?
So I completely understand the perspective that we have a conscious choice and we should make that choice. But I just wanted to say that the responsibility should lie on the companies and the governments. So they keep your information, everything that you like and you don't like, and the people you interact with, it all goes to a data center. This is essentially surveillance, emotional surveillance. Apart from this, what I felt like was not there was the reason why we go on entertainment, like why we go on our phones.
Perfect, because that's exactly what I want to ask you guys. Do any of you use entertainment to escape?
Yeah.
I do.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
The majority, yeah?
Yes.
This side of the room?
I don't feel the need to escape from any aspect of my life. If anything, even with like quote unquote like negative emotions that may arise, I choose to sit with them, feel them, let them take their course, and then.
Wahed?
I would say the same thing, but I'd like to add, getting inspiration, getting ideas. The internet is so rich and it's filled with inspiration. So when you kind of cut yourself off, and I did what you said, I did it for 2 months where I was like, I'm gonna go off social media and entertainment as a whole. But I realized that I was kind of missing out on things in the world. My friends would ask me about topics, and I would be like, where did that come from? Have I been living under a rock? If we do that for a month or two, it's gonna help us spiritually for sure. But we're gonna miss out.
It's true. Right? You do miss out on the virtual world, but I would still encourage you to try the experiment and to try to create collective in real life spaces where you're investing in alternatives.
I'm a very artsy kid. Things like crocheting, knitting, embroidery, painting, drawing, whatever it may be. These kinds of arts are so fun and relaxing to me because I genuinely zone out, but in a good way. Like, how when you're so conscious that you feel your fingers, like you feel their existence.
I think we're demonizing media a bit way too much. Of course, there's a problem when they are curating content that is supposed to make you think a certain way. But for some of us, reading is just not it. So if I want to learn about the history of a particular place, sometimes just that little 2-minute video is what I need. In terms of other people who have other ways of learning, media has actually come to help some of us quickly comprehend something.
Well, a lot of what we're talking about kind of underscores that a lot of this comes down to balance. One of the good things about entertainment is that it lets you escape sometimes and go somewhere else, and that's fine. I think the big challenge that we're faced with digital media, and I think this precedes even social media and algorithms, is that the screen is a medium of distraction. Digital media is fine for a lot of stuff, but we have to recognize that other media are probably better for other ways of taking in information and taking in entertainment.
Okay, so let me ask you this. I want a show of hands, right, from everyone here. Is entertainment making us better or worse? Who thinks it's making us better? No, better or worse?
No, better. Neither.
Better.
I would lean towards better.
No, it's better.
Marya, Nicholas,
That's such an
Anna?
unanswerable question.
Yeah,
It's
You're
not a
talking
yes or no.
about, you're talking about
Entertainment could be going
entertainment
for a walk.
as it exists today.
As it exists today, is it making us better? If you believe so, raise your hands.
Specifically modern entertainment.
Then I take my hand back.
I'm taking my hand up.
Okay, and who thinks it's making us worse? Is entertainment making us worse?
My vote was modern entertainment, bad.
I voted that entertainment is good, very good, actually. My hand was the highest.
Because in as much as I will preach and tell people that, no, you can actually use it to empower yourself and to make yourself a better human being, let's be honest, most people won't do that.
I think if entertainment wasn't here, literally I wouldn't be who I am right now. Me and my friends or like my colleagues, we work in humanitarian sector basically. It's very mentally draining and it's very traumatizing to an extent. And in these moments, I know that entertainment really helps. It takes you to a safe space.
It's really important to get back to the point of just sheer quantity, which is Nicholas's point about balance. Escapism, wanting to just not be in your body and in your own thoughts. I mean, that's been around since the beginning of human time. And there's fundamentally not anything wrong with that as long as that's not what you're doing all day, every day.
Right.
So I don't know. I think there's a very good point. We don't want to demonize, but on the other hand, as you mentioned, these algorithmically generated forms of entertainment really are designed to hijack our reward pathway and keep us engaged long beyond what we want for ourselves and our communities. It's not all bad, and it's okay some of the time, but it's really a matter of balance and scale.
So I guess I was saying that
Sundus, you raised your
useful.
hand and then you said, I'm taking my hand down. Why?
Because I think when you use it as a tool, it has made the world better in many ways because it has helped us learn more, connect more. If we're not being mindful with it, it can very quickly go from being useful to disastrous.
Marya, go ahead, and then we'll hear from Amir.
Yeah, in the US, we don't have political leadership that understands technology as it is today. And you see some of the farce that happens when, you've got like these tech CEOs that go in front of Congress and have conversations that show like a lack of basic understanding of technology. The reason I bring that up is because I do think that if you look at the history of technology and of entertainment, government has played a really important role. Companies then follow the rules. There's no incentive usually for companies to regulate themselves and to say, oh, for social benefit, we're going to do this. They really just care about money. At the end, and I'm speaking like as somebody who sat inside a company, individuals will care, but ultimately the way that a company is set up, it is really financially driven, right? So government, it's really the role of government to do regulation. But in order for that to happen, we need people to be advocates to help governmental agencies actually understand what is going on in terms of technology, how it's impacting us socially, and then to propose and pass regulation that can actually do that. And why we haven't seen this, my personal perspective, is because technology has so rapidly accelerated that society is no longer able to keep up in the way that it used to be able to regulate. And so what I would say to those of you who are young people is, how can you start to like communicate that to them and help them encourage passing legislation that can protect you and the generations to come?
One of the things I just realized we haven't discussed at all today is the socioeconomic disparity issues related to this. And I think we need to count that in the equation, because as we go forward, and look at the cumulative harms, we're probably going to see it, as with all social harms, affect people who are living in poverty, who are otherwise disenfranchised.
One thing to this point that Anna just made, I was a community organizer and I worked in South LA in a very low-income community. One of the only places that were safe for people to go to was a library. And one of the reasons why people went to the library was for books, but also for access to internet. Because one of the things that we do have is a tech divide, because there is a financial barrier for people to have access to technology. When I've traveled in parts of the world, you also see that lack of ability of access to technology. And in some ways, that's really harmful.
I think that the harms of digital media and algorithmic entertainment is affecting all of us, not just younger generations. I think we see a lot of older people who are now incredibly isolated, binging on Netflix all day long, spending enormous amounts of time on their phone, not engaging in public spaces, third spaces. So it's a multi-generational issue. Although I do believe that children in particular are a vulnerable population, and we should start there when we think about creating limits and guardrails.
What about you, Nicholas? What do you think?
Well, I agree that looking at this in purely generational terms is a mistake, because it does influence everyone.
Okay.
But if you look at a lot of kind of objective criteria, I'm talking about the US now because that's what I know. Math scores going down. Reading scores going down. General knowledge scores going down. You'd think if all these tools and all this information was working well, you would not see that. Depression going up, anxiety going up, loneliness going up. I would say they're worse off.
I don't think that the medium of social media specifically, entertainment is a little bit different for me, is a neutral one. I think it is actually leading to harm, but I think that you can counteract that through your own discipline and your own agency. Not necessarily everyone, but many people. And I think that the real takeaway I have here is, what is the social contract that we're going to make around this? Because this is our new lived reality.
I do have a question. Do you truly believe that entertainment and the way it developed is what caused the decrease in grades and the depression and anxiety? Is that truly like one of the main factors?
I think the internet and digital media So entertainment is a huge, huge category. And it's not very helpful to speak in terms of entertainment. But I would say the new technologies of entertainment and digital entertainment has played a role. Is it the entire cause? Absolutely not, but it has played a major role.
I can confidently say that we live in an era of information overload. I think we're all on the brink of going crazy because of the amount of information we consume on a day-to-day basis. I'm surprised, we haven't gone mentals, but I guess we're on the verge. Yeah.
Marya, what will you be taking away from the conversation with the students?
I think I'm terrified about digital media. I want to sit with the question of social media as a drug and addiction. And then the other thing I would say is I do think that we need to have a much deeper conversation around solutions. There's societal things, there's individual things, but I'd love for there to be more of a conversation around this and for there to be actual experimentation around it.
Nicholas, what will you take away from this conversation with the students?
It certainly made clear to me that, sometimes we speak in generalities of society or of a particular generation, but you always have to remember that there's individual experience, which can be very different from the generalizations. And I think what we've heard from many of these young people is that their individual experience does not fit a general mold, but is their own experience. And we have to remember that when we're talking about any broad societal trend.
Okay. What about you, Anna?
What I will take with me is the nuance that you all pushed for in this dialogue, insisting that we look at both the positive and the negative, which I think is very mature and sophisticated of all of you, and so I applaud you for that.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Doha Debates. Thank you to our speakers, thank you to our students, and all of you for watching and listening. We've explored bold ideas, challenged assumptions, and we've opened space for understanding, with respect and curiosity at the center. But the conversation doesn't end here. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Share your thoughts, your questions, your own perspectives. We're listening.
The next step,